So here is our recording. Can everyone see my screen okay? That's one of the things about
Mhm.
Zoom I can't really see. So welcome everybody to December 15th Starlight Session. I'm super excited because we have Lisa Shepard here to share with us everything she can in 59 minutes about IPAs. We're going to not do a lot of chit chat, but we're going to go ahead and get started. And just look, that's my reminder to hit record. But just before we get started, like I normally do, Lisa is here sharing her time and talent. Yay, thank you so much. If you have questions, put it in the chat box. I'll be monitoring the chat box. And if it's something that we can handle right at the moment, we'll talk about it. Otherwise, we'll talk about it at the end. And this probably is not going to be an issue today, but if you see some sort of grammatical or cultural concern, just shoot me an email. We don't want to interrupt our flow for one of those things that should be discussed offline. So with that, here's our plan for today. We're going to learn about IPAs. We'll do our usual looking ahead. If you have needs and wants, I want to be able to discuss it, and you'll get a certificate of attendance. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Nope, I don't know how to stop sharing my screen. How do I stop? Here we go. How many times did we practice?
Well, we did practice.
No, I don't know. Oh, there's the stop share. Okay.
All right.
Lisa.
All right. Let me just make sure I can get shared here. Is my screen is not shared, is it?
Whoops. Not right now.
Okay. Let's see here what happened.
You guys, we promise. We met a couple
yes,
days ago.
Here we go. It just says it's disabled.
Oh no.
When I try.
Did it? There you go. That's on me. Try now.
Okay. How's that? I think we're there.
Hey, perfect.
Yay. Right. Well, now let me see here. Well, it's a pleasure to be with all of you. Thank you for coming. I'm Lisa Shepard. I am a former French teacher. This is not where I want this to be. I taught French for 29 years, and now I work with teachers. And I love doing that. I might go back to the classroom one of these days. I'm really not for sure yet. Here I am. Yay. So if you want to reach out to me and chat about any of this afterwards, please feel free to contact me in any of those ways. Gmail is probably the best. And at the end of today, I will have a tiny URL, I think it's a bit.ly actually, of the actual slideshows. You can go back and look at it and anything and just reach out, but you'll have all my information there. So the title is Designing IPA. So I'm just going to kind of guide you step by step in a very short period of time on just kind of the steps of how you might design an IPA. So these are our objectives, and I'm actually just going to let you skim those. But it's just, you can explain what an IPA is. You can choose an authentic resource. You can create the interpretive assessment of that resource. You can design an interpersonal activity based on the resource, a presentational activity based on the resource. Oh, I left one out. You can design a context for the IPA, and then the presentational comes at the end. So those are the steps, and we're going to do this quick. I always like to include a slide with the ACTFL core practices, no matter what I'm talking about, because okay, she's back. All right, we're back. We stayed here, but I didn't say anything important. So are we good?
Everything's important. You're good as long as it keeps going. Yes.
All right, good. So IPA, it stands for Integrated Performance Assessment. So it's an assessment. I usually use it as a summative assessment after a unit. It's a performance. So we are assessing a performance. We can't really assess proficiency according to ACTFL unless we have been OPI trained, but it's an assessment of what the students you can do. It's a performance because you will have practiced similar tests throughout the unit. And it's integrated because it's all based on a common, usually a common authentic resource. So, and it shows what your students can do in the interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational modes. So with how many fingers up for how comfortable you are with what the modes of communication are? 5, you know them all, you can recite them. 4, you kind of know. 3. All right, so let's talk really quick about what they are. The interpretive mode is one-way communication where you're reading something or listening to something, and that you are interpreting what the author or speaker, the message they want you to understand. So it's not always just a literal comprehension, but also you're reading between the lines a little bit of what their perspective is or their purpose. The interpersonal mode, I think, is the trickiest one for people. Um, it requires an active negotiation of meaning among individuals. So it's two-way communication, but it can't just be like a memorized skit because there's no negotiation. So if a student can memorize in advance what their response is to an interpersonal task, it's not interpersonal. There's no negotiation. So we'll talk about, when we talk about examples of interpersonal tasks on the IPA, we'll talk about how to make sure that we have that spontaneity and that negotiation. And the students will make adjustments and clarifications as they are performing the task. And that's usually speaking and listening. You can do it reading and writing, like text messages. I think it's real hard to ensure total spontaneity in writing. So I usually focus on speaking. And then the last one is the presentational mode. So this is when the students are creating messages that inform, explain, persuade, or narrate. So in general, it's not, they are creating a message that has a point to it. And we'll talk about some examples. And again, this is one way communication, so there's no negotiation of meaning. You have, the student has to make themselves understood either orally or in writing. And we really also want to encourage the students to make sure their message is takes into account the culture of the audience. So that's where we bring in that interculturality. So why do we use the IPAs? So it's the students demonstrate what they can do. It doesn't evaluate proficiency, but certainly progress towards it. It assesses all 3 modes of communication. It integrates all the ACTFL standards, the 5 Cs. It provides a context for language. And it also is really great preparation for those high stakes testing. If you have IB class or AP or IB tests have all those same features that an IPA has. So the biggie is you're going to start with some kind of authentic resource. So I'm going to go through these. So the core practice that goes with that is that we guide learners through interpreting authentic resources. And they're going to do that on the IPA as well as in all the lessons leading up to the IPA.
Hey, Lisa, can I pop
Yeah,
in here? This is one of
sure.
the things I think we struggle with when we are, like, for me, I'm typically the singleton. There's the constant, but I have textbook resources and I don't have to plan all of my levels. I don't have time to go look for an authentic text. And so
Right.
I want folks to not think, well, gosh, I don't have time to do that. I can't do IPAs. I think that you can pull the resources that you have. To me, the whole process of an IPA, now I don't do them as assessments. I do the everyday IPA format in my class, but I think there's something to be said for, if you're not quite to the point of authentic text, find something that's going to anchor what you're doing from what you've got.
I love that. I love that. And if you certainly, if you can only do one all unit during that month or 6 weeks of a unit, maybe all you can do is that one on the IPA. But yeah, it's a while probably. If you're newer to the process, it's a while. And it does take a long time to create everything on your own. And a lot of times textbooks will include some authentic resources, or at least authentic that kind of replicates the format of an authentic resource. As a reminder though, for people that aren't too sure, authentic texts are defined as being written by members of a language and culture group for members of the same language and culture group. So, when we do design something, it can be great and wonderful. It doesn't meet that definition, but start where you are. So just what Shannon was saying, if what you can do is design some really communicative tasks based on a text from your textbook, then you start there. Start where you are. Where you are is the perfect place to be. And we'll just keep moving forward. So it's kind of a reminder before we look at the types of tasks we expect our students to do, is we want to just talk about real quick about what the targeted proficiency level will be for our students. So for French and Spanish, the level 1 difficulty languages, in level 1 of our coursework, they're about novice mid is the goal for the end of the year. In level 2, about novice high, and there's a little variety depending on the mode of communication, but in general. Level 3, about intermediate low. Now, if you have some block scheduling or other alternative scheduling, this could change a little bit. This gives you the hours, so you can check for the hours. Level 4 is about intermediate mid, level 5 about intermediate high. So it's just kind of good to kind of have an idea when you go to define what the tasks are going to be, to keep in mind what the expectations are at that level. And that second slide, I don't, in case, because you mentioned you have a Russian teacher in your group, so then that one I think would be a level 3 language. So again, I want this to serve as a resource, but because of our, we have a short period of time, I'm not going to bore you by reading everything, but I want you to be able to go back and look at this. So we're going to start, as I mentioned, with that interpretive task. So these are a little summary of what the interpretive can-dos tell us. This is what we expect novices to be able to do. So at novice low, they're just identifying words that they've memorized. But what I really want to key in is by gestures that are supported by gestures or visual. So in level 1, and also novice mid is going to say when supported by gestures or visual. So any text that you give your level 1 students, because our expectation at the end of the year is novice mid here, it has to have pictures in it. The students are starting by reading the pictures. And that's something I think when people think about their students might not be ready for authentic resources, I think they're thinking about literature. Your students aren't ready for literature in level 1. They're ready to look at a picture. They're ready to look at a flyer that lists the school supplies that are on sale, or some simple infographics. They're going to read the pictures. It's not till novice high, this level 2, where we're taking away the support of pictures. So I think we're going to look at some examples of authentic resources just to kind of retrain our brain of what that means to be authentic. So infographics we love. They have that visual support. They can have a lot of cultural content. They can be really comprehensible, and you can find them so easy. All you do is Google whatever you're interested in plus infographic in your language, and you'll find a million. So getting back to the idea of, oh my gosh, I lost my black box. Whoa. So I'm just going to skip that slide.
Well, I've used that same one. I know what that black box is for.
I know, but it's the black box is always covering up the word.
It's a great infographic about what kinds of films people like.
It absolutely is great. And this black box is supposed to be covering up that word, and somehow I moved it around. It's not there. So anyway, I don't know how to get rid of it. Here we are. We're all adults. Just don't look at it. But it is a great example of what we mean by using those pictures in an authentic resource that you could use the first day of French 1 if you wanted to. This is all cognates. Everything in here is a cognate. Everything. And there are pictures, but not of all of them, thank goodness. So there are pictures to support it, to support the meaning and their cognates. Your principal could understand this, right? Anybody, could understand this. An example in Spanish, this had a message. The message is, can your dog eat this? But there are words and there are pictures. So I just like to start with those just as a reminder that authentic text can be very comprehensible. Social media is great, right? The kids love to have a chance to interpret social media. The main reason is because if they want to, when they figure out these are real people who have posted, who have tweeted or posted on Instagram, you'll find that your students are going to want to tweet back at these people or follow them on Instagram. And then outside of your class, they're getting all this exposure to the target language. So this was just an example of some tweets. I was working with daily routine. So as a I just put in the search box on Twitter, I put the phrase, I think je me lève, or je me réveille. I just did a search on certain phrases that I wanted my students to be able to read, and I got all these texts, and they're so rich then in cultural, information. Instagram, here are some examples. This time I was looking, I think, for like kind of breakfast. I wanted to see breakfast around the Francophone world. So I picked some, I just did a search on breakfast, on the word for breakfast, and just, zeroed in on ones where people were in different French-speaking countries. some examples in Spanish. Other authentic text with lots of pictures for our novices can be catalogs, brochures, flyers. As we move up towards that novice high, it could be articles, and I've tried to put the links for most of these down at the bottom if you wanted to see all of it. Children's books. This was like an online book. This I use it in my introductory unit, usually probably toward the beginning of something where your students are learning how to describe, give important information about themselves. This is from a site for pen pals. So, there's some great visuals on the left here about what they like. There's a lot of cognates there. There's some pictures to help. Even over here under my preferences, there's a lot of cognates. And on top of all of it, your students could actually reach out and, be key pals with these people. This was another example I used for a family unit. It's a website where people are looking for a nanny for their kids. So they're describing their family, they're describing their personality, the personality that they're looking for in an au pair. Great vocab. For a house unit, this is a post from a home exchange site. And then, of course, we also want to make sure that we're sometimes giving our students video resources, video text, oral text to interpret. Cartoons I love for the novices because there's all that visual. Uh-oh, go away. Thank goodness. Could be songs that are kind of educational, but by educational, they're for the kids in the target culture, but like, this about reminding you to brush your teeth for the Spanish one. In my sample IPA that we'll be looking at later, this was the text that I used. So this was for novice high. It was later, earlier in French too. And it was a series of articles where they interviewed kids around the Francophone world about what they do in the summertime. So this was just this boy in Senegal talking about what he does in the summertime. So those were some examples you could use with novices. For when we get up to the intermediates, they go, now we're at the sentence level that we expect them to be able to interpret. As we move higher up in the intermediates, the texts get a little bit longer, more descriptive, and you can see what the can-dos say there. So some text we might use. Sometimes the text can be the same types of text. Checking my time there. So this is still an infographic, but there's a lot more words on it. So for me, I would consider this more intermediate level of infographic. Blogs can be great. There's a Spanish example. The online encyclopedia, this one, I think I put what it's called on, but there's one, Wikipedia, which this might be from, and they have it in several languages, but it's just, you can find texts about a lot of different topics, but they're pretty comprehensible. Vlogs, we did blogs, we can do vlogs, music videos can be great. They're usually pretty hard, right? I usually would support that by giving the students the lyrics. It's pretty hard to understand at even an intermediate level to understand most of the song. Commercials can be great. They're usually a lot of times kind of sometimes they can be kind of emotional or have really great stories. So in creating this IPA, we've determined what our proficiency level is of our students. We've chosen some kind of resource. So now what are we going to give the students? What are they going to do to show that they could interpret that resource? So remember that we do have this core practice of guiding students to interpret the authentic resource. And there is a guide to IPAs that you can buy. And that has a template, and actually once you have a copy of this, if you click right up here, you'll have access to the template. So they give you a very specific types of questions to ask, and you might not ask all the questions. We'll look at some examples, but so there's going to be keyword recognition, main ideas, supporting details, organizational features, spoiler alert, I never use that one, guessing meaning from context, inferences, author's perspective, and comparing cultural perspectives. So, was that in there twice? Okay. So these are little screenshots from a sample IPA, and you can actually see the whole thing by clicking here when we're all done. You can see what the whole thing looks like in a document. But this is just kind of blown up so we could see it. So the first part is keyword recognition. And what you would do for that part is that you just look over the text that you pick. So I had the article on the boy from Senegal. And I just, in English, wrote some words that I think they're going to know at this point. These are things maybe that we've been talking about in this unit or in previous units, and I'm writing them in English, and they just scan the article and find it in French. And then they would just write that in French. And there were actually 10 of them. It's just to make it big enough, I just showed part. So they're
Can
going to
I,
find it. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
just want to ask a question. So in my head, I'm thinking, if we've studied all of these words, do I want to ask them to find it in the text? Like, where's that line between we've studied it, they should know it, versus I want to see if they can get it from the reading?
Right. And later, in a couple more sections, we're going to have a part where we want them to use context clues.
All right.
And I like that they have this part first because it builds up the confidence of the kids because they're like, oh, I know this, where I already know all these words. But you do find out sometimes there's more than one word for like grandma because there can be grandmother and grandma. So you do know that they're actually looking for the text. But I think another reason for this part is that we really want students to read text multiple times. So if they read it once to find the words, and then we'll see, the next time if you look at B there, then they're going to read for the main idea and then supporting detail. So it's just kind of the first run through. And then it also helps them, it kind of activates their schema because they have a reason to read, or they're starting to come up with some ideas about maybe what it's about by looking at those words. So then the second part B is you don't have to do anything. That part B is always just what's the main idea. And sometimes I use what's the purpose. They use main idea, but sometimes purpose helps the kids to think a little bit more deeply. And then supporting details. And I think this is the part that can be kind of tricky. When I work with groups on creating IPAs in a workshop, this is the trickiest part. But what it asks you to do on this template from the manual is to give some details. Some of those will be in the article and some aren't. So I think if you look at the template that was linked there, I think it says put 5 to 7 details that are there and 3 distractors. So the students then are going to read it. They're going to check if it's found in the article. And then on that line afterwards, they're going to say what it is. So for example, where Abbas lives. The article did give that information. So the students would check that little line in the beginning. And then where he lives is Dakar, Senegal. So that would go after. The language that he speaks, I don't remember if that's, let's just say that wasn't included. So then they don't check that and they don't put anything. So even with a pretty quick glance, you can tell how much the students understood, because if they really didn't, they're going to be making some stuff up.
Right.
So these can be checked pretty quickly.
And we had actually a question that is probably everybody's going to be on one end or the other, but I
Sure.
think it's a really good question. There has been so much debate about when you put the questions in the L1 and when you put it in the L2. So can you sort of speak to why we're doing these in why we are doing these in English, and if it changes, all of that sort of stuff? Give us your
Yes.
opinions on that.
I will. I'll give you, more importantly, I'll give you the authors of the IPA manual. And they do say that you're going to change some of this at upper levels. Most of us are teaching some novices, at least some, right?
Most.
Even in intermediate, a lot of times I keep in English. There's a couple reasons. So for keyword, that doesn't work if it's not, if you're not, they're not. So you would just have to eliminate that if you want it to be all in target language, which would be fine. You could, do something else with vocab. It wouldn't be that important. That's not really a major part of the assessment. Supporting details. What I would kind of, if you wanted to keep it all in the target language, what I would change that part to is sometimes I like to do a true false with justification. So you could put in the target language, true or false, Abbas lives in Senegal. The students would put true, and then you ask them to justify it. So they're picking out something from the text rather than just guessing. So they could say, true, he lives in Dakar, the capital of Senegal. That would be a detail that was included in the text. But the reason why English is more effective in showing what they can understand is that it's really hard to write questions for novices that don't have any of the answer in the question. So if you say, if you ask a question, even that has the verb lives, and say, where does, Abbas live? If the students know the word live, they're just going to find a sentence in there that says live and copy it down. And you don't really know for sure that you're assessing whether or not they understand it. When they get upper levels, when they have more vocabulary, it's easier to ask questions with in which your question does not have all the same words as the answer. So I think it's a lot easier to have it in English. And I think the students feel more comfortable, even though it actually is more effective in showing whether or not they understood, because they can't just look for a word and then, write the words that are around it. Did I answer your question?
Absolutely. And I feel like
Okay.
some of us feel justified as lower level teachers where we're like, oh my gosh, I can't put all these in questions in the language. So thank you so much.
Right. And the other thing also is that you want to make sure you're assessing their ability to interpret the authentic resource and not to interpret your question.
Questions, right.
Yeah. So if I asked a really hard question, that had a lot of structures they didn't know, and they leave it blank, they may have totally understood the text that was at their level. So, that's another reason. So then it moves on. So just to get back what you were saying, the next part is guessing meaning from context. So the directions in the actual manual are that you write one of the sentence and you underline the word that you think they can figure out. So this should be a word they don't know, and that they would have to use context clues to figure it out. So I chose this sentence, which says he speaks Wolof, the most common language in Senegal. Now, they don't say in the manual to use multiple choice. I use multiple choice, especially in the beginning. I found that with my students, they were so worried about being wrong that they would leave it blank rather than guess. So some real high flyer, high achieving students or anxious students. And I didn't want them to be anxious. So I have chosen to make it multiple choice in the beginning. The first couple IPAs I give, and then I kind of move away, take that scaffolding away. But it still requires them to use context clues. But because I picked all choices that could make sense there, it could be the most difficult language, could be the most common language, the easiest language, or the oldest language. They're going to use more context clues from the article to figure it out. So that's up to you, but you're choosing a sentence from the text and then underlining the word that you want them to guess at the meaning of. And it's not really meant to be cognates there as much as, they'll use other information from the text to figure it out. The next part is inference, and I think this in part E, and I think this is always kind of a little tricky to write. The kind of best explanation that I've seen for what the inference is it's just where that place where a student's background knowledge and the text kind of intersect. So to answer this, the students are bringing to the test their background knowledge, but also supporting that with the text. And it's tricky, I'll tell you that in this one. So the question I came up with was, do you think he lives in a city or a small village? Why do you think so? So again, if they can support either one, you could take either one. I will say that most students put small village, but yet he talks about going to the mall and the video arcade and various things like that, right? But that comes from, the stereotypes that they have about people that live in Africa. So that's a place where you get to catch those, and gives you a great chance to talk about that. And also the importance of just justifying your opinion from, using textual support to justify your answers. The next one then is author's perspective, and I also like to make this multiple choice. I think the manual might recommend that too. So, I thought of these possible perspectives. And again, it's the quality of the justification that we're really looking for. Not that there's just, there might not be just one answer. I mean, I don't know the author of that article. I can't say for sure what they were thinking. I know I can't support the fact that children in Senegal have difficult lives because Abbas didn't mention one difficult thing about his life in the article. Children in Senegal have a lot in common with French kids. Well, he talks about playing video games. He talks about playing soccer. He talks about hanging out with his cousins and watching cartoons on TV. And based on what my students would know at this point, because when, in this unit, when we talked about a lot of leisure activities and what we do for fun, they saw, they read infographics from France. So they would have that background knowledge to be able to support that when he says that he plays soccer, that that's also something kids in France would do. Then the third one, children in Senegal have happy lives in spite of the poverty in which they live. He doesn't ever mention any type of poverty at all. But again, we see some of those stereotypes that our students bring to our class when they answer these questions. The problem is they can't support them with the text. So, but this comes kind of earlier in the year sometimes for kids. And then for cultural perspectives, the IPA manual gives us some different ideas. The ones I picked were kind of just asking the students to compare their life to Abbas's. So how was his summer vacation similar to yours? So the students could talk about he hangs out with his friends and I hang out with my friends. He goes to the arcade, I go to the arcade. And then why do you think this is? So that's kind of, asking them to consider some perspectives. And it could be pretty simple at this stage. It could be, well, kids, video games are fun for everybody, regardless of where you live or what language you speak at home.
So I
So
want to
then,
ask a
yeah,
question
go
while
ahead.
we're on these, because there it is, the rubric I was going to ask about grading. So I'm just going to
Yes.
sit back and be quiet.
Yay! So not yay, I'm being quiet. I want to hear from you, but yay that it's going to be helpful. So they have a rubric in the IPA manual, and this I've just modified it a bit. Theirs has the words. First of all, I think I added another column, and they have the words. They didn't have any numbers, which if you don't need to give grades, awesome. Then don't put any numbers on here. I need to give grades. So what I loved about the rubric they provide is that it has descriptors for each of those sections of the interpretive test that we just looked at. And I just added the number. So accomplished, I decide was 10 out of 10. I grade everything out of 10 because it's just a nice even round number for me. Strong comprehension, I did 9. Now, as you're grading, they're not going to be the same. You're not going to pick one column and they're going to be all there. They may have identified every single word, so they're accomplished down there. Main idea, they might be, yeah, they got it. They didn't give lots of examples, so that maybe it would be an 8 or a 9. So I just would check, in each row I would check, and then I just eyeball it. So if they had a couple 10s and a couple 8s and 4 9s or so, then I would just say they got a 9. I think, it doesn't have to be math. We're talking about a skill and a performance can't always be described by an explicit number, exact number. So I would say give them the benefit of the doubt, but you want to be able to support that with, what they showed you. But I would not do all the math and get out a calculator for every one of these. That's one thing I want to try to talk about is how we can, not make this take longer than it has to do.
I think everybody just sighed a huge sigh of relief on that.
Just eyeball it. And I didn't talk about this either, but like that task you just looked at, you don't have to correct anything. Again, I would have the rubric out and I would have that, and I don't write anything. I just, just glance. You can pretty much glance and get a really good idea about what they got. I read it, but you don't have to make corrections to it. And you can pretty quickly just check mark. Another thing that I found super helpful is I gave the students a rubric. And before they were allowed to turn in their IPA, they had to self-assess. And that told me so much. And it doesn't take them long at all, but it made them to kind of start to think about how they were doing. And I love that.
So now, do you go over it with them? Like, if you're not leaving feedback, do you do like a whole class debrief on?
Well, that is definitely something we want to do. In an ideal world, we would. I don't know what your situation is. I know I had sometimes had kids that hadn't taken it 4 months later, and I didn't give zeros for late work. They just had to eventually do it. So yes, when I realized at some point that everybody had taken it, yes, unfortunately by then it's like 3 months ahead of time. They're not really needing to use that feedback specifically. It's summative rather than formative. Feedback is super helpful, but we live in the real world. So, and I will say that the recommendation is that the student should get feedback on that interpretive task actually before you do the next one, the interpersonal. But that didn't, that's not how I did it in my class. Again, this was the unit assessment. So if I were to have them do that and then take a few days to grade all of them before I did the interpersonal, what would I be doing with that? Moving on to the next chat, the next unit, that wasn't going to work for me. So I didn't do that.
So
But I
that's
also didn't
something,
open,
yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
No, that's something I run into when I read about IPAs as a summative task. They always mention do feedback, then the next thing. These are multi-day things. I'm like, I understand the multi-day. I don't understand the feedback loop in the middle of each of these modes.
Right.
I'm glad you said that.
Sometimes people that design things are not in, a middle school or high school classroom every day and don't have to think about the same things that we have to think about. So, um, I don't design as we look at some examples. I don't design interpersonals that require them to specifically have shown, use everything from that text in their interpersonal. So I can get away with not doing it.
Gotcha.
For listening, I'm not going to talk much about this, partly because of time constraints, but I would just say that template we just looked at, I love it and it's great for reading. It's horrible for listening. They would have to listen to something so many times. Imagine just picking out those 10 words, how many times they would have to listen. It would take them 2 hours to listen to a 3-minute video to get all of that, because you can't skim a recording the way you can skim a written text. So I do think it's super important to have a listening test. I actually usually on most of my IPAs had a reading and a listening. But to assess the listening, I usually use something super simple like a T-chart where they wrote the main ideas on the left and supporting details on the right. And that worked. Otherwise you can do it Edpuzzle or something like that. And this was a rubric I might use for something like that T-chart. It's just, how much detail did they have? So the next thing is that we want our IPAs to have a context, because the whole point is that we want this assessment to feel like a real world use of the language, and hopefully even maybe it can be a real world, if it just depends what you have access to with your students. So if you're awesome, you might be able to start with the context, and I'm sure we're supposed to start with the context. For me, it worked out first to find this great authentic resource I wanted them to read or listen to. And then like, okay, I got it. Now, why is somebody reading this? And then I created my context based on what I already had found. So why would someone read this text? What might they listen to if you want to add a listening? What might they talk about, and with whom might they talk? And what might they read? Write. So those are going to be the next tasks coming up. So my context, with everyone's lovely faces, I'm not going to be able to read all of it, but that's okay. You can read about it. You can read it while I take a sip of water. So the gist, though, is that a boy, similar to the boy who wrote that interview, is coming to stay with you. I think I put because his sister is going to be in the children's hospital in your city. So you want to know how to entertain him. It's the summertime and you want to, plan fun things to do with him while you're hosting him and his family in your house. So, there's a video, that's just the video I was going to show about a teenager talking about a Canadian teenager, what she does for fun to give you some ideas. Then you're going to talk to a friend about what the two of you do in the summer to get more ideas. And then you're going to write a letter to this boy saying, oh, I can't wait for you to come. I have these fun things planned for us. We can go to the pool and we can you can play video games. And, we're going to be asking them when we look at the text, we're going to be asking the students to show that interculturality by making suggestions that are relevant for the cultural background of the reader or the hopeful, the imaginary reader, if that's what we can do. So then we move on. So now we have a context. So we move on to that interpersonal task. And that is one of our core practices, that we design oral interpersonal communication tasks. So the can-dos, these are the novice, low, because for each level of proficiency, then there are different language functions. So again, this part is just going to be a resource for you. We don't it's when you go to create your own IPA, you can look back at these, and also I have a link to where they actually appear in published form from ACTFL. Sometimes the document is so rich when you go to the website with that document, sometimes people can get a little bit lost, I think. So I just like to kind of give them to you just in one place. So the main thing here is, how will you ensure that the communication is spontaneous? So how I do this in my class is I assign, so I have that start with the interpretive task. So everybody starts reading. And then usually, since I don't make my task super specific, my interpersonal super dependent on the interpretive, as they're reading, I pull 2 kids up to my desk. They don't know in advance who their partner is going to be. I really don't know in advance. I kind of look around and pick 2. In general, and teachers have different opinions, and other people smarter than me have a different idea than me. I usually pick 2 when possible. They're somewhat similar in proficiency level. So I feel like that helps kind of brings out everybody's best work.
And it's also not fair to a really high achieving student to have to be helping a student who needs more scaffolding, because it's not the student's job to scaffold, I think.
So, I kind of agree, but actually I kind of don't, because what I end up telling them is, it is your job to make yourself understood by your partner. And I find then that forces them to use those, those communicative functions to be understood. It forces them to repeat, to say things in different ways. Because what's going to happen when they're in, a target environment is they're going to have to make themselves understood. So
I will
I
consider myself corrected. Thank you.
don't. Like I said, I'm still trying to pick ones that are close. But I think it's real beautiful when you see this. I always talk about this girl I had named Rachel, but Rachel had an IEP. I was blessed to have her in my class. It was really hard for her to write, but I could have anybody partner with Rachel, because she would keep at it. And if she asked questions, so what do you do for fun? If she's got the blank stare, she's like, come on, do you play soccer, or do you, watch TV, like in the target language? But she just figured out that she had to do that forced questioning and things that she had heard me do in class. And that is something I should have been teaching my students to do, but it just never occurred to me to do it. But Rachel taught me that. She could pull it out. She could communicate with anyone, because she had those skills. So I learned a lot from
That
that.
was awesome.
Yeah, it was really cool. So yeah, so that's how I do. So I pull up 2 kids. I actually would have 2 kids at my desk performing and 2 kids on deck. And that's how I could get the whole class. I could get 30 kids done easily in a class period, because you're listening to 2 at a time. And I like to do it live. I'm filling out a rubric as they're talking, and then I'm done, which is key. So in this case, I'll just let you look at it real quick. So I definitely want to save 10 minutes at the end for some questions, but this is the task that I had the students do. Basically, they were pretty much being themselves and talking about what they do for fun. But I added this part about, try to talk about this kids in Senegal. So, when you're talking to your partner, like, oh yeah, that's a good idea, because playing soccer is a good idea, because kids in Senegal, I know they really like to play soccer. In this article I read, this kid likes to play soccer. So to try to bring that interculturality into it as much as you can. And that, there are different opinions about that too, right? Some people don't agree that we should ask our students to pretend in class, that they should just only speak as themselves. I respect that. But it's kind of hard to get that intercultural component into it if we can't a little bit force that. At least I haven't found a way to. Other people maybe can. So sometimes I do give them kind of a role to play. So then a presentational task. So this is, makes most sense to come at the end, because it's where they're kind of synthesizing what they learned so far. So these are the can-dos for each level and you can look those over. And then So some kind of things to think about is, can you provide that authentic audience? You know, I love the years that I was able to get it together and have keep house for our students. My presentational task every unit could be, now write your pen pal a letter where you talk about what you do for fun, what your house is like, what your school schedule is like, the last trip you took, you know, whatever your themes are, and that's awesome. Sometimes you can't. It's real hard to make those things work out. And you know, sometimes you can't. So you have to, you know, maybe pretend.
Yeah, in my last school, Lisa, just because the kids used to, after like the first 4 units, they're like, all right, we're tired of this. But every presentational task was, all right, you're foreign exchange student, Abdul. He is from
Yes.
Nigeria. And by like the fourth one, they were like, stop with the Abdul, please give us something different. So
Pick
you can
somebody
fake
else.
it, and then you can almost make it a joke, because by the end of the year with my kids, I was like, guys, it's Abdul time. And they'd be like, and then just tap out what they
They
needed.
need a variety, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that. But so again, bringing in that intercultural competence. The question, will it be polished or on demand? And you know, a lot of times when you look at that definition of presentational, it requires, um, depending on what definition you look at, it requires the ability to write drafts and stuff. I don't I don't assess anything that wasn't done in front of me with a pencil and paper only. Um, I because that, to me, if you know, if I've allowed them to use some kind of electronic, really to some extent even a dictionary, how am I assessing, you know, when we look at the rubric, but how am I assessing their vocabulary knowledge, or you know, if they're not using what was in their brain? So for
And
me, and you might do another presentation that could be awesome, but for my IPA where I am assessing their presentational mode, I use, you know, I use an on-demand task, but I might also do drafts in advance, but the day of, and I give feedback on those drafts, those were formatives, but the day of, they don't have anything in front of them. For me, other people do it differently.
and I
And some
think,
people don't even do drafts on the same topic.
well, I think you could also structure your task day like, hey, here's 2 minutes for a pre-write, here's 2 minutes for a draft, here's 2 minutes for going back and checking. Because at the end of the day,
Absolutely.
polished in our class is going to be, it could be the same as in English. You've got one class period to write an essay. Yes, you have time to review it, but you know, you don't have 6 weeks to get it ready for, you know, college application. There's like an
I
element to
love
me of
that.
how polished can you be in a class period.
Right. I absolutely love that. I absolutely love that. I wouldn't say, you know, to do a PowerPoint presentation with note cards in front of you and call that a presentational task if they're reading something from a note card that they Google translated it, because it's just not. But what you said is perfect. That makes perfect sense to me. So a lot of times when I'm trying to design a presentational task, I go to that RAFT acronym, if people have seen it. So R stands for role, A is for audience, F is for format, and T is for topic. So if you look at the presentational task I chose for that sample IPA, so the role is, you know, you're the host student. The audience is this boy from Senegal. The format is it's a letter, and the task is telling what life is like in your house, you know, like what you do for fun. So good. Really quick, the appendix. So the template. So earlier on that previous slide is a link to the actual template that's in the back of the IPA manual. This link, which y'all have access to this in a minute, this link is the one that I use if we had a 3-hour workshop and everybody was creating an IPA. This has sections that you will fill in with the, and it has even some links to some resources. So I'll let you check that out at your time. Ohio has some really awesome rubrics. That is a link to their page with, they have different kinds. They have single point rubrics and different kinds that you can check out, and maybe pick one that works for you depending on your school. These are some IPAs that I've written over the years. Some are better than others. These are all a little bit older now. But if you kind of need some idea about a task, regardless of what your language, you might get some ideas there. Some other sites, those are a few other sites that have some IPAs. And if you're kind of curious, how do you get your students ready for an IPA? This is just, you can click there for kind of a unit plan that I have that prepared the students for that sample IPA that we looked at. And I'm going to leave this up here for you as I have a few minutes for questions, but that's the bit.ly for this presentation so that you can click on everything that we have. So what questions do people have?
Or comments or any
Or
kind of
comments
feedback
or
or
anything.
experiences. Yeah, this is your time, you guys. We have Lisa. Pick her brain.
Hey, pick away.
I think everybody's shy.
Oh, yeah. Well, they can write something if they don't want to say it. You can tell me.
I'm
I
not
know
like
it's a
that.
lot, and I know it was kind of fast.
All right, I'm gonna put the bit.ly. Yes, let me see. I will just copy it. Someone just asked if we could put the bit.ly in the chat, so I'm gonna copy
Oh,
it while others
perfect.
are.
I think one really great place to do is some of you are thinking there's just no way this is too much. So I guess talk about what the biggest stumbling blocks are. I think that's really can be really helpful sometimes to get feedback on those. I'll just say this, I loved using IPAs. And when I first started, my first presentation about IPAs was called IP/Yay, because I had a student who called it IP/Yay. And my students liked it because you're not trying to catch what they can't do. You are not giving them something that is right or wrong. Most students are going to feel successful after an IPA. It is not a I got you. You don't have, sometimes I would be like, oh gosh, the IPA is in 2 days and I've had it in my plans. I haven't even told the students yet. It doesn't matter. It's not something they have to study for. They might practice. I would give them the tasks ahead of time. They might practice a few questions like, oh, I know I have to talk about what I do for fun. So now how do I say that? Maybe they would rehearse a little bit, a few questions they might want to ask. But in general, this is that snapshot of that day and what they can do that day. So it's much less stressful for students than having to come up with one answer, the one correct answer in a blank.
Hey,
Now I'm
Lisa, I
talking too
am
much.
trying to just old school like retype and copy, and I am not
Yes,
getting good luck. Could you just copy that and drop it into the chat box, maybe?
I can. I think I can. I think I can if I go off of screen share, right?
Perfect. Yeah, I
Okay,
think that sounds
let
right.
me. Am I
And I will say,
sensing
y'all,
you?
like I feel like I have this great awareness of IPAs and I understand conceptually. I have not done them as an assessment, as like a formative, I mean, as a summative assessment in my classes. But
Uh-huh.
I, listened to Meredith White one time and I thought it was genius, but I followed that structure every day in my class. So I'm thinking the more I feel confident with them, I can implement them as a summative because my kids are used to doing these things every day.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
All right. So thank
All
you.
right, hold on. Let me get to the chat. Here's the chat.
Yeah, when I tried to type that one in, maybe it's an L somewhere.
Oh, it's Naylon. Hi, Naylon. Yep, that should work. I just clicked on it. I don't know if I can find you people again, but there, that should work.
All right. Yes, Lisa's worked. I wonder what letter we were all typing incorrectly.
Yay.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, let me find
So
my.
student absence and fear of failure is a huge roadblock. Yeah, absences are a pain. They're a pain, whatever kind of assessment that you give. What I would say, the interpretive part and the presentational part are not really different than any kind of traditional assessment that you would give. The interpersonal can be harder because I need to talk to somebody else. Sometimes I just do what you can do. So sometimes for that, I have to be their partner. And some teachers will tell you they're always their partner, especially for novices. Personally, I love to have them talking at each other, even if it's a little bit ugly. It's supposed to be ugly in the beginning. But just kind of like what I was saying about my friend Rachel, what it enabled them to do because they had to fight. I would just say, like, fight for it. You're going to get this. Fight for it. Keep trying. And to me, it was beautiful seeing that. But yeah, if a kid's absent, the IPA was 2 months ago and grades are due tomorrow, then you're their partner.
Yeah.
And most of these conversations, I'm only giving them, like French 1 minute to do it, French 2, maybe 2 or 3 minutes. This is not a 10-minute conversation.
For sure.
It's short and you can get it. I could get the whole IPA done in 90 minutes. I've heard other speakers saying, oh, we can, only do an IPA twice a year because it takes so long. Once you start writing them, they write themselves really quickly. And as far as administering them, yeah, you can probably do it in 90 minutes, if you have a block schedule, or I would do it in like 2 kind of traditional class periods. But
well, that gives me a little bit of hope. Well,
and
y'all,
also spread the tasks out. Do the interpretive. I mean, you could you can do the interpretive earlier in the unit if you want. I could have given them that thing about a boss, that article about a boss 2 weeks before the IPA, really. They would still have it. And so you can divide up, whatever works for you. There's no IPA police.
thank goodness.
Yes.
I think the key thing with IPAs is that we're switching how not only teachers, but also how students see what it means to be successful in a language.
Yes.
We're shifting that conversation from you can conjugate in 6 different terms and you can do all the irregulars to, but you can understand and you can communicate. I think it's a really powerful tool if you are trying to jump from one ship to the other.
Yeah, but it requires a lot. The student, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And because the students in general are more, there are students who are not successful at memorizing conjugation. I mean, there were, and maybe you all are so awesome at it that all of your kids, are conjugation experts. I wasn't that good at it, I guess, because some types of kids did not do great at that. Yet they could be really successful on tasks, which I think are even more important.
For sure. And like the questions that my kids ask now, it's not what's the form of this verb, it's how do I say this phrase, how do I say this sort of longer sentence,
those chunks. Yeah,
like they're seeing the language and I'm presenting it as chunks instead of, because for me, I was not a grammar person. Like I dreaded it. I just wanted to talk to people. I wanted to learn. I wanted to feel successful. So I try to do that with my students, and seeing them, like today we're doing portfolios and it was, remind me again how I say I like. And I just thought, okay, that's way more, granted, that's a little bit embarrassing that we're at the end of the semester and ask me how to say that, but it's more powerful to me for them to say, how do I say I like, he likes, she doesn't like, instead of
how do I conjugate Gustar or something like
what's
that?
the VU form of MA? You know what I mean? So like,
right.
to me, it's a better, I like,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm
Because
not
they care about what they're saying, about meaning. It's a focus on meaning. Absolutely. That's
yeah.
better.
All right.
Absolutely.
Well, we got like 3 minutes, so let me do my closing stuff. Lisa,
Sure.
thank you so much. I cannot believe you squeezed all of that into that much time. You
It was
are
quick.
brilliant.
Well, thank you.
We got a couple things that are for Georgia teachers. So if you're not a
All
Georgia
right.
teacher, these won't make sense, but our partner grants, which is.
All right. So I'm going to leave. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Don't quote me on what partner stands for, but it is providing access and resources to rural language teachers. We have a grant. It's up to $2,000 per classroom, per language, maybe. So like my school could submit a French for me because I'm the only teacher, but we would submit a Spanish for the 2 other teachers. So, and it's really for resources like copies, paper, pencils, the things that you need that maybe your schools are can't offer you. So that grant is open. And I was thinking about it, I was like, I don't even know what to apply for. So I reached out to Patrick Wallace and he said, yeah, well, I asked him questions. I was like, do you have examples? How do I do this? What did it? And then I thought, wait, why don't we do a workshop for Starlight people who might be in the same boat? So next Monday, if you are interested in these partner grants, we're going to host a little workshop where Patrick will walk us through it. Very informal. Here's what it is. Here's some examples. If you need some creativity about what would I do with $2,000. Caveat, you have to be an official rural district. And if you just go to the World Languages website on Godot, there's a huge, great, lovely graphic. You can figure out if you're an official one or not. So we're going to do that on Monday. And like everything else we do, I will record it. So if you can't make it, it'll be available on the YouTube playlist. If you have not registered for FLAG, it is March 3rd and 4th of next year. So registration's open. And if there's, I know Danny is one of our Georgia folks. If you guys, if you have any ideas, if you want to host one of our Starlight sessions, my folks who are not from Georgia, we would love to have you. We have a calendar of sort of topics we came up with, but if you have something great that you'd love to share with our rural teachers, I'm put you on the calendar. Anything that you guys, our Starlight community, if there's something that would be helpful for you in your teaching, let me know and we'll try to create a session about it. And if you need a certificate of attendance, there you go, scan it and it will automatically send to your email. And with that, it is 5 o'clock on the dot. Thank you, everybody. Let me check our chat messages. Yes, well, I'm so glad you're here, Eileen. Thank you so much. Pamela, Virginia, y'all come back. We would love to have y'all. And I'm going to hit stop recording because you don't need to hear me anymore. As soon as I figure out how to hit stop record, I will do that. Story of my life. All right. Bye, everybody.